Hey people, Voice talking to you, and today we are talking about CONSCRIPT. This is an isometric third-person shooter survival horror game set in the French trenches during the First World War. After the fort he's stationed beneath is overrun by German forces, Andre, our character, is forced to face overwhelming and terrifying odds to find his wounded brother and escape the trenches. Now, this game has a lot of very disturbing graphic imagery and intense, realistic themes associated with the horrors of war. So if that's not your thing, I wouldn't recommend this one. That said, if you like the look of this game and want to try out the demo for free or download the full version for yourself, I'll have a link for you down in the description. Down there you'll also find a link to my Twitch channel in case you'd like to see my first impressions of these games live. Now, CONSCRIPT is a game very obviously inspired by other survival horror greats like Resident Evil and Silent Hill. I'd say the gameplay mechanics remind me a bit more of Resident Evil, while the overall style and visual themes are more reminiscent of Silent Hill. For obvious reasons, the setting reminded me a bit of Amnesia: The Bunker as well. As great as it is to have the style of those games carried over, the real question is whether CONSCRIPT has managed to capture the charm and iconic gameplay of its inspirations. From a visual perspective, I'd say CONSCRIPT does a damn good job of both staying true to its predecessors and showing off its own unique qualities. Now, before I get too much into the details, let me briefly cover what I know of the story. We play as Andre, a French soldier conscripted alongside his brother Pierre during the later years of World War I. They're stationed in the trenches defending Fort Seville, near Verdun, one of the bloodiest battlefields of the war. The game begins as shells begin to fall and assault whistles begin to squeal, signaling the start of a vicious German attack on the fort. With the French troops and defenses already in a horrid state, Andre finds his brother wounded in a hand-to-hand fight with a German raider. Leaving his unconscious sibling in the safety of the trench, he rushes to the front lines to assist in fending off the assault. However, when gas shells begin wiping out the defenders, Andre is forced to retreat to the trenches to escape. Now he finds his injured brother missing and both his commanding officer and the runner delivering retreat orders killed. As one of the last survivors, outnumbered and surrounded by German soldiers, Andre must find a way to survive while he searches for his brother and find a way to escape the trenches alive. The atmosphere of this game is really stellar, honestly. The surface is grimy, dreary, and bloody, while the underground sections are dark, eerie, and tense. The layout of the levels seem historically inspired, too, though there are obviously some artistic liberties taken here and there. Overall, though, I think the artists nailed the unsettling feeling of being stranded in the muddy trenches stacked with corpses while enemy forces are hunting you. The pixelated art style wouldn't have been my first choice, but that's why they make games and I just talk about them. Not only does it harken back to the style of games like Silent Hill, but the unfocused, somewhat blurry rendering of allies and enemies alike hides the details of each person. The similar colors of uniform can make it hard to distinguish friend from foe in a cinch. Even though all the enemies seem to just be humans, the fact that you never see anybody's faces makes it easy to see them as more monster than human. At the same time, though, some of the items that can be found on the bodies of slain enemies include bloody photographs of family members and hometowns, reminding us that when we choose to kill, it's not just some mindless zombie, but another person who may have been just as scared as we are. Oh, it's a picture of his house. Ooh, now I feel bad. This is the kind of psychological horror this game excels at, and while I wouldn't rule out the presence of some supernatural influence, I imagine this game will stick to the harsh reality, which is plenty nasty if you ask me. Either way, you aren't likely to be fighting giant mutated rats or anything, but the steady breathing of an enemy raider with a gas mask stalking the darkened tunnels looking for you can be absolutely nerve-wracking, especially when you have no idea where they are. On top of that, there's the mentally broken soldiers still walking around in the dark amidst those who have been burned alive, blown apart, poisoned by gas, or left behind with sickening infections. That said, CONSCRIPT doesn't rely on tons of gore to sell the atmosphere though, instead leaning on solid writing and tons of detail. Everything from bullets flying overhead, occasional artillery explosions shaking the tunnels, allied soldiers fighting elsewhere on screen, and even the little visual additions like showing a blood-stained barricaded door with unsettling detail. Combined with the impressive auditory ambience, the immersion of this game is top tier. There seems to be a deeper underlying mystery to all of this as well. Firstly, where did Pierre go? Was he captured by the enemy or somehow evacuated? Why were the blockhouses locked without telling the soldiers why? Was the death of the runner really caused by enemy troops, or was there a commander that didn't want to accept defeat? Looking past the atmosphere of the game, you're probably wondering about the gameplay mechanics. In true survival horror fashion, there are lots of enemies, but not a lot of ammunition. To keep your magazines stocked, you'll have to scrounge for whatever supplies you can find. While scavenging the trenches and tunnels, we can find melee weapons like the trench shovel, guns like the rifle, pistol, and shotgun, grenades, and tools. All melee weapons except for the combat knife have a durability meter, which will cause them to eventually break unless a repair kit is used to fix them. Guns won't break, but ammo is limited, so you'll need to make every last shot count. You can aim at specific body parts of enemies, so landing a headshot is more likely to take them down in one hit, assuming they aren't wearing a helmet. The overall flow of combat and the handling of weapons reminds me a lot of Darkwood, if anyone remembers that game. The longer you aim a shot, the better your accuracy will be. Charging up a melee swing deals more damage and gets you more oomph for your stamina. Watching your stamina is especially important, particularly in melee combat. Not only do you need it to attack, but sprinting and dodge rolling also drain stamina. It takes a minute to get used to, but combat has a great sense of threat and is pretty satisfying overall. Shots and melee hits have a good sense of impact, the animations are all solid, and taking damage isn't something to be taken lightly, as healing will require resources, so you never really feel comfortable in combat. Enemies also have a kick action to interrupt the player and stop them from charging up a melee swing or stun locking them with repeated swats, so keeping a proper distance is important, even in melee. This game will not let you cheese it, and I respect that. Now, the overall enemy variety was lacking a bit, but this is still early on in the game, and I can definitely see how the enemy types would progress. I saw a couple of different melee troops, a rifleman, and an armor-plated giant with an axe who ate bullets like candy. Large German man! Oh! He's got an axe! From there, it wouldn't be hard to add bigger juggernauts, machine gunners, shotgun raiders, snipers, and so on, which I imagine will be in the full version. The second major aspect of CONSCRIPT's gameplay lies in its exploration and puzzles. On the exploration side, I'm not surprised that there's not a ton of variety to the environments, considering it's essentially set in a fortified mud hole, but even so, the devs did a good job of spicing up the different locations and making them distinct and interesting. You know, if you find blood-soaked corpse dumps and tunnels filled with poison gas to be interesting. You freak. That said, the main reason we'll be exploring is to solve puzzles and find loot. Aside from weapons, items, and other valuables, we can also find crafting materials, which can be combined into healing items and ammunition. Overall, this seems to be a pretty basic system, but also very reminiscent of Resident Evil. Combine cloth with alcohol to make bandages, combine gunpowder with chems to make bullets, and so on. Of course, you also have a very limited inventory, so storing items you aren't using and making multiple trips is going to be necessary if you want to stay well stocked. Weapons, ammo, and even key items take up space too, so keep that in mind. There's also a trader that can be found in certain locations around the map. He sells a variety of basic equipment, including ammo and crafting materials, but he can also upgrade your guns if you bring in weapon parts. Now, I wasn't particularly worried about this, but there's also a decent variety of weapons for the player to use, and lots of environmental features such as explosive barrels and mounted machine guns for players to take advantage of. Enemies can still enter the trenches from over the top. However, finding and using barbed wire spools can fix up parapets to stop them from spawning. With the kind of difficulty that comes standard in survival horror, you'll need to use every one of these advantages to come out on top. With that aside, I'd have to admit that I didn't really get a good feel for the puzzle aspects of the game. Sure, I had to do the classic backtrack once you find the right key, and some doorways were blocked by heavy boxes or mine carts that you had to push aside, but I'm not sure I would really call those puzzles. I wouldn't put so much emphasis on this normally, but CONSCRIPT is tagged as a puzzle game as well, and the quality of its puzzles are still uncertain to me. Taking a quick step back to the difficulty, I'm personally the kind of player who feels that survival horror titles should be difficult, at least to a certain degree. And while it seems that the developers somewhat agree with me on that front, they did also include some great customization options so you can make the game as easy or as hard as you'd like. Not only that, but if you're a fan of classic Resident Evil where you have a limited number of saves, you can enable or disable that mechanic as well. Also, while I'm thinking about it, I don't really have any complaints about this game's UI. In fact, the pixelated paper-style inventory, map, and journal are all very immersive and thematically tasteful. On top of that, there's an impressive level of detail in cutscenes and environmental storytelling, such as scraps of posters, little cinematics, CGs of photographs and objects, and tons more. The one thematic element I would say that I didn't see enough of was the psychological impact on our character. While the soldiers around Andre are breaking down and acting irrationally under such immense stress, Andre remains remarkably calm, even after killing 20 to 30 men, and most of them with nothing but a trench shovel. Smack! Yeah. I really want to see how this starts to affect Andre, both in a story capacity and maybe a gameplay aspect. Now, right at the end of the demo, we get into what I think is a flashback scene from Andre, so I have some ideas about where they may be taking the story, but I suppose we won't know how deep the rabbit hole really goes until we play the full game. Though I will admit that CONSCRIPT doesn't seem to be blazing any trails in the way it sets itself up, the overall experience is pretty good. In terms of ambience and style, CONSCRIPT definitely sets itself apart with a tense atmosphere and highly detailed visuals. If you like survival horror and you want a more realistic experience with grueling gameplay and solid mechanics, I have no problem recommending CONSCRIPT. But then again, I'm just the voice in your head. So what do you think about CONSCRIPT? Do you feel it's too derivative of its inspirations, or is it unique enough to catch your attention? What are your thoughts on the art style? If you're into history, how does this game look in terms of accuracy to the setting? Let's talk about it down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, leaving a like helps me out a ton, and subscribing is the best way to support the channel and to keep new videos coming your way, since I put out new stuff every single week. Thanks so much for listening to me today, and you'll be hearing from me again real soon. Homemade spiked club used for raiding trenches, designed to inflict severe bleeding and trauma. Oh. Thanks.